Hello again. Today I thought I'd do a video on the differences between jumping and flying kicks in Taekwondo or martial arts in general, and answer the question, are flying kicks useless in martial arts? Because you hear a lot of people talking about, when are you ever going to do a 360 flying reverse roundhouse kick or whatever? Like, what is the practical use of that, and does that have any place in a real world fight, or when would you ever use such a technique? So first of all, the difference between to most people, when you say jumping or flying, they mean basically the same thing. In Taekwondo, they have a specific meaning when they say do, for example, a jumping front snap kick or a jumping roundhouse kick versus a flying front snap kick or a flying roundhouse kick. And the difference between them is, with a jumping kick, what you are doing is you are using the non-kicking leg to help drive your body up into the air so that you can kick with the other leg. So in other words, if you look at a jumping front snap kick, for example, if you look at one of my videos or whatever, you can see that in a jumping front snap kick, the non-kicking leg moves first, and that leg is coming up first, and then I'm kicking with the kicking leg. So that is a jumping front snap kick. If you look at a flying front snap kick, for instance, both feet come up together. Like, both feet leave the ground at the same time and you kick. Even though you're only kicking with the one leg, both feet come off the ground at the same time and then you kick. So differences between them, a flying technique is generally a faster technique. Like, there's less of a, you're not selling it as much, like you're not giving it away when you do a flying technique. It's just kind of instantaneous. But at the same time, when you use a jumping technique, you can usually cover more ground with a jumping technique. Like, you can move farther forward. If you're doing a jumping technique, you can usually get yourself higher up into the air using jumping techniques. That tends to be the main differences between those two. Same thing with roundhouse kick. Jumping roundhouse kick, the non-kicking leg is coming up first, and then you're kicking with the other leg. With a flying roundhouse kick, both feet are coming up together and then you're kicking. Both feet leave the ground together and then you kick with one leg. So that's the difference between jumping and flying. That's why when you hear in Taekwondo or other martial arts somebody says jumping or flying, to most people it means the same thing, but there is that subtle difference. They are two different techniques. Flying usually being more difficult to perform than the jumping technique, or the jumping equivalent of the same technique, usually. Then there's the question of, are these techniques practical? Are they useful? Like, when would you ever want to, run 20 or 30 feet across a room and do a flying side kick? And, it looks great in the movies. A lot of the techniques look spectacular when you see them being performed, but when would you ever use it in real life? Well, you have to remember that a lot of these techniques, the jumping and flying techniques, they are skill building techniques. So what I mean by that is, there are a lot of techniques that you perform when doing martial arts that are used more to build up your ability and your conditioning than they are for their real world use. Not that they don't still have some applications in the real world. So for example, if you wanted to think of a flying side kick, for instance, a real world application of that could be, imagine that there is an obstacle in between you and your opponent. So let's say there's a rock, or let's say that there's like a small railing or fence or something, or shrub, anything that is between you and your opponent or something, and you're trying to cover that ground quickly and get to them. And you're going to have to jump over something anyway to get to them quickly if you're going to make a straight line path to them. And while you're doing that, you'd like to also attack as you get there. So you don't just want to make yourself vulnerable and come at your opponent and just leap and then be a defenseless target or a sitting duck as you get over there and close the distance. You want to also be throwing an attack at the same time as you get there. And if this is a real world fight, then it's not necessarily just one-on-one. There could be multiple people engaged in this fight. There might be 5 or 10 or 20 people, like 2 groups of people all fighting. So it's quite possible that somebody's attention is, not drawn to you specifically. They might be focused on somebody else, and that gives you the opportunity to close that distance, clear an obstacle if there happens to be one, and strike a target. I've heard talk that, once upon a time, flying techniques or whatever were used to knock people off of horseback and stuff like that. But, again, it seems doubtful when you see just how tall a horse is and how unlikely you are to be able to get that high up in the air to be able to attack somebody on a horse. But, is it possible? Perhaps. I think it's more likely that you're going to use it to clear obstacles. You might need to strike an opponent that is, in some cases, flying techniques are great for striking targets that you can't reach from the ground. So if you think of a jumping high kick or some of those techniques, you can use those to kick targets that are, say, up a level from where you are, whether somebody is on a staircase or they're on a hillside or wherever they happen to be. But if they are out of reach of your kick otherwise, you can use the jump to basically get up and still hit them. So there are real world applications for those techniques, but obviously they're less. The primary idea behind learning a lot of the aerial techniques that you get in martial arts is the skill building aspect of it, because you are developing muscle strength, you're developing the balance and coordination when you come down, being able to land properly. You're developing a lot of skill, and if you can do the techniques effectively in the air, then obviously it's no problem for you to do them on the ground. So in many ways it's a skill building thing. There are some real world applications, but they're usually fewer and farther between. And that's why a lot of those techniques are taught at the higher belt levels. If you look at any martial art, usually the most valuable techniques that you need to learn are the techniques that you learn early on at the lower belt levels. And the stuff that comes later is just kind of icing on the cake. It's just, you learn a few advanced techniques for special uses or special cases. But the most important stuff is usually taught early on and taught at the beginning. And the later stuff is advanced applications of many of the basic techniques that you already know. So hopefully that clears up some of those questions that you might have had. And jumping versus flying, and are the kicks practical? Are they completely useless when you're doing flying kicks? The answer is they're used to build skill, and they do have some real world applications as well. Thanks.